On one night each year, we invite strangers to knock on our doors, hand out candy, and walk our streets in masks. For most, Halloween is costumes, laughter, and sugar, but in several places, that ritual turned into something far darker. These are real crimes that shocked communities and in some cases made headlines worldwide. What happens when Halloween stops being make-believe? Our first story begins in a quiet Midwestern neighborhood, a place where parents felt safe letting their children go door to door. A 9-year-old girl named Lisa, her full name reported as indefinido in the source, left for trick-or-treating and never came back. It was a simple October evening. Houses were lit, bags were jingling, and neighbors were stepping outside to pass out candy. Then the phone calls started. A frantic search followed. Neighbors combed yards, volunteers scanned back alleys, and police organized canvases. The house-to-house search stretched into days. Suspicion turned inward. According to investigators and community reports, the person they had trusted most, their neighbor, was implicated. The accusation rocked the small town. For families who had once waved to that neighbor across the picket fence, the betrayal cut deep. The investigation, as the records reflect, focused on an unnamed neighbor alleged to have been responsible for Lisa's disappearance and death. Authorities gathered evidence, and the community watched the legal process unfold with a mix of hope and dread. The aftermath was not only legal, it was social. Parents stopped answering their doors without peeking through locks. The town's Halloween traditions changed. Schools instituted stricter rules, and some streets went dark that year as families chose safety over ritual. For many, the memory of that night shifted Halloween from a carefree evening to a night that required planning, supervision, and caution. The year of the case is reported as indefinido in the source. The ambiguity only adds to the unease. Details that remain unclear keep questions alive in a community already grieving. If this kind of deep-dive true crime is your interest, hit subscribe and like. This channel releases more specials like this. Before we move on, a quick note from our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by 7K, a sports and gaming app offering a variety of betting and gaming options. Check the link in the description to learn more. Only for 18+. Gambling is not an investment. Play responsibly. Across the Pacific, an October night in Seoul in 2022 became one of the deadliest public disasters related to Halloween in recent memory. In Itaewon, a popular nightlife district, people were gathering to celebrate as pandemic restrictions eased. The streets filled quickly. Narrow alleys, part of the neighborhood's charm, became traps when the crowd density rose beyond safe limits. According to reports, a rapid surge of bodies pushed through constricted pathways. The celebration dissolved into chaos. In a matter of moments, the movement of the crowd turned deadly. The official toll reported in multiple sources was 159 people dead, with hundreds more injured or traumatized. Rescue teams were overwhelmed. Investigators pointed to several contributing factors. The sheer number of people, narrow streets not designed for that kind of flow, inadequate crowd management, and delayed emergency response in some areas. Witnesses described scenes of people trying to help one another, and first responders battling impossible conditions to reach those in need. The scale of the tragedy forced a reckoning. It prompted city officials and event organizers around the world to look at how public celebrations are managed. Questions about crowd control, emergency access, and the responsibility of local authorities for large, decentralized gatherings became central to the conversation. For survivors and families of the victims, the loss left a permanent scar. For governments and planners, the event became a case study in the consequences of underestimating crowd dynamics. The image of a festive night turning into mass casualty was a stark reminder that danger can hide not in an assailant's hand, but in the pressure of a crowd. But that's not the only way Halloween has gone wrong. In Orinda, California, a private Halloween party advertised online as an exclusive event spiraled out of control. What organizers expected to be a contained gathering swelled into a crowd of more than 100 people who arrived at a rented house. At roughly 11 p.m., as the party reached its peak, shots rang out inside the house. The scene turned chaotic. By the time the police had secured the area and medics had treated the wounded, 5 people were dead. Investigators found multiple shell casings and at least 2 guns at the scene. The shooting raised immediate questions. Who fired the shots? Why did it happen? And how did the party become a target for such lethal violence? As the weeks went by, those questions remained difficult to answer. No official culprit was identified in the immediate aftermath. Witness statements contained contradictions. Some attendees described a sudden altercation. Others spoke of panicked crowds and people fleeing through backyards. The case, as reported, remains unsolved. No confirmed motive, no definitive chain of events that all witnesses agreed upon. The effect on the local community was profound. Parents forbade attendance at private parties. Some communities banned underage events in private homes. Online platforms and homeowners felt pressure to vet invites and limit large gatherings. For those who knew the victims, the loss was unbearable, and the absence of answers only magnified the pain. A night meant for celebration became, for many, a symbol of unpredictability when crowds of strangers gather in private spaces. From chaotic parties to targeted crimes, sometimes the danger of Halloween is a betrayal by someone you should be able to trust. That betrayal was at the heart of another case from Pennsylvania in the early 1990s. In Oil City, an 11-year-old girl named Shauna, reported with name variations in sources, went missing after a school Halloween party. She was last seen walking home from the event. The community launched an exhaustive search. Days stretched into weeks. The case remained cold for years until the investigative landscape began to change in the early 2000s. In 2002, advances in DNA analysis and renewed investigative efforts pointed to suspects from the local area. Names reported in sources include Timothy and James O'Brien and Eldred Walker. Those developments brought a measure of progress to a case that had haunted the town for more than a decade. The emotional toll was enormous. The town instituted measures to protect children, including a long ban on trick-or-treating, reportedly 15 years, and stricter parental supervision became the norm. For a generation of families, Halloween was no longer a simple outing. It became an event to coordinate carefully, with parents accompanying children on the streets and schools reinforcing safety protocols. This case illustrates how time and technology can change the direction of an investigation, but it also shows how long communities carry the consequences of a single night. Suspicion, policy change, and the slow churn of investigative breakthroughs left their mark on the people connected to the case. Some Halloween horrors, however, don't come from strangers or crowds, but from within a family. In a case reported from Texas in 1974, a child who ate part of a candy stash became fatally poisoned. The investigation that followed did not point to an anonymous attacker or a dangerous stranger roaming the streets. Instead, suspicion fell on the father. According to sources, the father, identified in records as Ronald Clare Brann, was accused of poisoning his son in an effort to collect on life insurance. The revelation shocked not only the local community, but also national audiences who followed the trial and the media coverage. Parents who had once thought to examine their children's candy for potential tampering now faced the darker possibility that a threat might come from inside the home. The case fueled intense public debate about safety measures on Halloween and about the social and economic pressures that can precede such crimes. Investigations into fatalities involving children are always handled with extreme care by authorities, and so were the proceedings in this case. The public reaction included calls for greater vigilance, improved packaging standards, and clearer guidance for parents on how to protect children during holiday events. While tampered candy remains rare, the memory of such cases reverberates, shaping how families approach holidays in which children are left more vulnerable. Halloween iconography itself has been weaponized in more recent years. In Texas in 2023, a man wearing a Michael Myers-style mask approached the door of a family. What began as a knock and an argument escalated to gunfire. The victim, identified as Eric Pate Jr., was killed. The assailant fled the scene, leaving behind only the mask. Investigators worked to trace witnesses, canvass the neighborhood, and follow physical leads, but the masked shooter's identity remained unknown at the time the sources reported. This event shows how the cultural artifacts of Halloween, masks, costumes, props, can be used to conceal identity and complicate investigations. A mask can obscure a face long enough to allow a perpetrator to vanish into a crowd. The symbolic commentary is grim. A prop meant for play can be turned into a tool for escape. For communities, the result is a renewed hesitancy about doorstep interactions and a push for neighborhood vigilance. Cameras on porches, children supervised by adults, and immediate calls to authorities if something feels off. Sometimes the loss is not only a matter of crime, but of tragic misunderstanding. In Louisiana in 1992, a 16-year-old exchange student named Yoshiro Ratori knocked on a house in the evening, accompanied by a friend. In a cross-cultural and tragic mistake, they knocked on the wrong residence. The homeowner, frightened and later stating that he felt threatened, fired a shot that killed Yoshiro. The case moved through the courts, and the homeowner, identified in sources as Rodney Pierce, was acquitted on grounds of self-defense. The legal outcome left two communities with different legacies. For one family, the acquittal added to an already unbearable grief. For others, the verdict confirmed the legal right to defend one's property. Across cultural lines, the event raised questions about orientation and understanding, how newcomers learn the norms of a place, how language barriers and late-night knocks can spiral into tragedy, and how the line between caution and catastrophe can be heartbreakingly thin. Each of these episodes carries a pattern, an ordinary Halloween ritual interrupted by a single act or a systemic failure, with consequences that ripple outward. In Wisconsin, the neighbor who betrayed a child. In Itaewon, the pressure of a crowd. In Orinda, a private party turned battlefield. In Oil City, a small town transformed by a long investigation. In Texas, a mask used to hide identity. And in Louisiana, a wrong knock with irreversible results. Different mechanisms, similar outcomes. Loss, grief, community retrenchment. Across these stories, there are lessons that are both practical and human. On a basic level, they suggest safety steps that families and communities can take without turning a joyful night into a fortress. Supervise young children, walk in groups, and designate a responsible adult for every small cluster. Agree on meeting points and check-in times. If attending a large public event, study escape routes. Avoid funneling into narrow alleys, and be mindful of crowd density. For private parties, vet invites and consider public venues when possible. If something feels off at your door, don't open it. Call a neighbor or law enforcement. When masks are involved, maintain situational awareness. Masks can hide identity, but they can also be harmless fun. The key is to balance festivity with prudence. The long-term consequences of these incidents go beyond immediate safety. Schools adopted new policies, some neighborhoods banned trick-or-treat for years, and entire towns reevaluated how they celebrate. For survivors and the families of victims, there is a lasting emotional cost. Anniversaries that reopen wounds, holiday traditions altered or abandoned, and a quiet vigilance that changes how people inhabit their streets. For society at large, these events remind us that rituals depend on mutual trust, and when that trust breaks down, the fallout is both practical and profound. We also must acknowledge uncertainty where it exists. Some cases remain unsolved or contested. The Orinda shooting, as reported, lacked an identified culprit in the immediate aftermath. The identity of the Texas masked shooter was unknown in the reports, and in other cases certain dates or spellings appear as indefinido in source documents. Those unresolved elements keep questions alive and, in their own way, sustain a community's search for closure. It's important to note when certainty is absent. Without definitive conclusions, renewed attention and careful investigation remain essential. Before we close, a brief reminder to take care of yourselves and your loved ones on nights like Halloween. If you're planning to go out, plan ahead. Tell someone where you're going, keep phones charged, and consider traveling with a trusted group. If you're hosting, think about how many guests can safely fit in your space and how to manage exits. If you see someone in need, alert authorities. And remember that many of these tragedies began with small human decisions. Decisions we can influence by choosing caution over convenience. This episode was brought to you by 7K. If you want to explore responsibly, check the link in the description for more on their sports and gaming app. Only for 18 plus. Gambling is not an investment. Play responsibly. If these stories moved you, please like and subscribe. We put care into researching these episodes, and your support helps us bring more investigative specials. For now, hold your loved ones close, keep the lights on if it helps, and know that behind every holiday tradition are people trying their best to keep one another safe. Thank you for watching.